The last candle in the bookshop flickered weakly, casting pale streaks of light across the dust-covered wooden shelves. On the floor, a dark pool of blood spread wide, reflecting the trembling glow as if it were breathing. Beside it lay Edward Blackwell, the owner of the rare bookshop, collapsed motionless, his eyes wide open, frozen in terror. The grandfather clock in the middle of the room had stopped ticking, its hands frozen at precisely 9:58, as if determined to mark the final moment of his life. A torn, leather-bound book lay discarded, while droplets... Part 1. The Opening and the Crime Scene. The last candle in the bookshop flickered weakly, throwing dull shadows across the old wooden shelves. The air smelled of damp paper, faded ink, and beeswax, hanging in the cold like a thin mist. On the floor, a pool of dark blood spread wide, catching the trembling glow of the flame as if it were an eye on the verge of closing. Beside it lay Edward Blackwell, owner of the Candlelit Bookshop, the man who had stood behind the counter night after night, with his gold-rimmed glasses and stern smile. Now he was collapsed on the ground, his eyes staring wide, frozen in a nameless terror. The pendulum clock in the center of the room had stopped. Both hands pinned the moment, 9:58. Beneath the cracked glass, a grain of dust still trembled faintly, as though time itself hesitated before being shoved aside. On the dark counter, a leather-bound book lay torn open, its spine ripped, its yellowed edges curled with blood. Wax from the nearby candle dripped steadily onto the cover, leaving hardened rings like fingerprints of the dark. The door to the shop stood ajar. A draught slipped in, making the little brass bell above the frame rattle with a hoarse, belated warning. Outside, drizzle glazed the cobblestones, throwing back the dim shimmer of windows around the square. Some swore they had seen a streak of red glide past the window, the swish of a cloak soaked with rain, just before the shop fell silent. The news spread like smoke through a chimney. Soon the people of St. Mary Mead were gathering, hovering at the doorway under dripping umbrellas, whispering tales that only needed half a fact to turn into full rumors. Some said Edward had enemies among collectors. Others insisted he owed money. A few even claimed there was a curse bound to a rare edition he owned. But everyone agreed on one thing. This death was no gentle passing. A young constable, flustered and shivering, tried to push the crowd back. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Stand clear for the inspector!" But curiosity pressed closer, eyes gleaming in the rain. When the police car from Much Benham finally swept into the square, its headlights cut across the shop front. Wet brick, the wooden sign Candlelit Bookshop swaying on rusty chains. The engine stopped. Doors opened, boots struck wet stone. Inspector Craddock was first inside. Pulling on his gloves, he moved slowly through the room, frowning at the poor light. "Shut the draught," he muttered. The young officer quickly closed the door. The air grew still. The flame steadied. The scene froze like a photograph. Craddock bent over the body, touched the rigid hand, checked the pulse, scribbled into a damp notebook. He raised his eyes to the stopped clock and murmured, "If we're lucky, that gives us a time the killer never planned for." Dr. Haydock soon arrived, smelling of camphor and damp wool. He knelt by Edward, opened his case, and examined the wound. Deep stab, left side, heavy blood loss. Time of death, sometime between 9:30 and 10, if that clock can be trusted. He glanced at Craddock and gave a solemn nod, half medical fact, half silent apology to the dead.
The shelves loomed from floor to ceiling, mute witnesses in rows of dusty spines. In the corner, a pair of beeswax candles burned unevenly. One had melted almost to the base, thick wax draping like frozen flowers. The other stood half-spent, smooth and nearly untouched. Craddock narrowed his eyes. "Odd. Could have spilled during a struggle," Haydock suggested, though without conviction. The young officer scratched notes furiously, his wet pen carrying the paper. Then